The early morning mist hung thick over the Okavango Delta in Botswana, turning the water channels into ribbons of silver mystery. The sound of a motorboat engine disturbed the morning chorus of fish eagles and reed frogs. The Wildlife Conservation Botswana Rescue Team had traveled through the night, navigating the treacherous waterways to reach this urgent call. Dr. Namsa Kumalo, head veterinarian with 18 years of experience in aquatic wildlife rescue, scanned the muddy banks from the boat's bow. Below, among the reeds and papyrus stalks, a heartbreaking sight emerged. A tiny baby hippo lay half-submerged in shallow water near an abandoned termite mound, while the distinctive tracks and disturbed mud showed where a hippopod had moved downstream days ago. Those tracks told a story Dr. Kumalo knew too well. When water sources dry up during severe drought, hippopods must travel long distances to find deeper pools. A calf too weak or sick to keep pace with the urgent migration becomes a tragic casualty. The pod cannot wait without risking the survival of all its members. The baby hippo, who would later be named River, was barely 2 months old, roughly 60 centimeters long and covered in the pinkish-gray skin typical of infant hippos. Her barrel-shaped body looked deflated, with visible dehydration causing her normally smooth skin to appear wrinkled and dull. The protective mucus layer that keeps hippo skin from cracking in the sun had dried completely, leaving patches of raw, sunburned flesh along her back and ears. River lay in the mud with her short legs splayed awkwardly, her rounded snout resting in a puddle barely deep enough to keep her nostrils moist. Her small ears, round like satellite dishes, twitched occasionally at flies, the only sign of consciousness. Her eyes, which should have been bright and curious, were half-closed and clouded with exhaustion. The distinctive tusks that would one day make her formidable were still just tiny bumps in her jaw. The boat anchored 30 meters away to minimize stress. Dr. Kumalo and her team waded carefully through the shallow water, each movement slow and deliberate. Experience had taught them that hippo calves separated from their mothers often enter a state of profound despair. Hippos are deeply social creatures, and isolation can be as deadly as physical injury. As they approached, River's condition became devastatingly clear. Her ribcage was visible beneath stretched skin. Hippo calves should be pleasantly plump, their bodies designed for buoyancy and warmth retention. Her breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps, each exhale creating tiny bubbles in the muddy water. Most concerning was her complete lack of defensive behavior. Even young hippos typically show aggression when approached. River's stillness spoke of total defeat. James Mattis, the hippo specialist with hands as gentle as they were strong, knelt in the mud beside River. He placed his palm on her side, feeling the rapid, fluttering heartbeat beneath the hot, dry skin, a sign of fever and severe dehydration. River responded only with a weak, mournful grunt, a sound that hippo calves make when calling for their mothers. It was a cry that would haunt the team for weeks. Loading River into the boat required extraordinary care. She was too weak to support her own weight, so the team used a specially designed sling that would keep her moist while preventing injury to her delicate skin. Throughout the process, River remained eerily passive, her eyes closed, her breathing labored, as though she had already given up on survival. The boat journey back to the Wildlife Conservation Center in Mon took 90 minutes, navigating carefully through channels choked with water lilies and papyrus. Throughout the trip, River lay motionless on water-soaked blankets, while James continuously poured lukewarm water over her skin to prevent further sun damage and monitored her vital signs. Every passing minute was critical. In her condition, River could easily slip into organ failure. The Wildlife Conservation Center, situated on the banks of the Thamalakane River, was a sanctuary surrounded by palm trees and acacia woodland. The moment the boat docked, the medical team was waiting with specialized hippo care equipment. River was immediately transported to the aquatic care unit, a shallow, temperature-controlled pool with soft rubber flooring to prevent injuries. The first 72 hours were touch and go. River received intravenous fluids to combat life-threatening dehydration and antibiotics to fight the infections brewing in her sunburned skin. She was too weak to nurse, so James had to bottle-feed her drops of specialized milk formula mixed with electrolytes, gently encouraging her to swallow while supporting her head above water. During those first critical days, River barely moved. Her small body floated limply in the shallow pool, kept afloat by carefully positioned foam supports. The care team worked in shifts around the clock, monitoring every breath, every heartbeat, watching for any sign of improvement or deterioration. On the fourth morning, a small miracle occurred. River opened her eyes fully and made a sound. Not the despairing call of before, but a questioning grunt, as if asking where she was. James, exhausted from 3 sleepless nights, couldn't contain his relief when River showed interest in the bottle for the first time, actually sucking rather than just passively allowing liquid to trickle into her mouth. As River's condition stabilized, she was gradually transitioned to the recovery habitat, a specially designed environment that balanced her need for water with opportunities for land exploration. This area covered approximately 300 square meters and included a large shallow pool, muddy banks, and a sandy area partially shaded by a massive baobab tree. But the most distinctive feature of this habitat was a collection of large, smooth river stones and boulders, carefully selected from the Okavango channels. These weren't ordinary rocks. They were ancient, water-worn granite formations, some weighing over 200 kilograms, ranging in color from pale gray to deep charcoal. Each had been smoothed by decades of water flow, their surfaces cool and textured with natural mineral patterns. These boulders served a crucial psychological purpose. In the wild, young hippos frequently rest against their mothers' bodies or press themselves against submerged rocks and logs for comfort and security. The stones provided tactile anchors, solid, unchanging presences that could help traumatized hippo calves feel grounded and protected. When River was first introduced to this environment, she was still weak, requiring assistance to move between water and land. James walked beside her in the shallow water, letting her familiarize herself with the space. The smell of fresh river water, mud, and sun-warmed stone created an olfactory landscape that awakened something deep in River's instincts. In those first moments, River simply floated in one spot, her nostrils just above the waterline, breathing in the new scents. Her small ears rotated, picking up the sounds of water lapping against the shore, birds calling from the baobab tree, and the distant rumble of the river beyond the sanctuary walls. She wasn't ready to explore, not yet. James retreated to the observation shelter, watching from a distance. He understood that River needed time to process this new environment without the pressure of human presence, even benevolent human presence. This adjustment could take hours or days. River began moving slowly, paddling with her short legs in the shallow water. She would pause at every change in water depth, every shift in the substrate beneath her feet, testing the environment with careful deliberation. This was the natural caution of hippos, careful, methodical beings despite their reputation for aggression. Then River saw it, a large boulder partially submerged at the pool's edge, where water met muddy bank. This stone was particularly striking, nearly 1 meter tall, smooth as polished marble, dark gray with veins of white quartz running through it like frozen lightning. The water around it was perhaps 40 centimeters deep, perfect for a young hippo to stand comfortably while still being mostly submerged. River stopped about 3 meters from the boulder, studying it with what appeared to be intense curiosity. In that moment, something shifted in her posture. Her ears perked forward, her eyes focused intently. Perhaps it was the boulder's solid, immovable presence, or maybe the way it warmed in the sun yet remained cool where water touched it. But River felt drawn forward. She paddled closer, each movement deliberate. When she was within touching distance, River extended her broad snout toward the stone's surface. The first contact was tentative, just the slightest brush of her sensitive upper lip against the cool granite. The boulder didn't move, didn't react, didn't leave. It simply existed, patient and permanent. Feeling safe, River explored more thoroughly. She rubbed her face along the stone's smooth surface, feeling the subtle texture of mineral grains and the temperature contrast between sun-warmed top and water-cooled bottom. The scent of the stone, ancient, earthy, clean, filled her nostrils with a primal familiarity. Then, in a movement that seemed both instinctive and intentional, River positioned her body alongside the boulder and leaned her full weight against it. For the first time since being separated from her mother and pod, she felt something solid supporting her. The stone didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't abandon her. It was simply there, reliable and real. River remained pressed against that boulder for over 2 hours, her eyes half closed in what James recognized as contentment. Her breathing slowed and deepened. Occasionally, she would rub her cheek against the stone's surface or rest her chin on a submerged ledge, as if confirming her companion was still there. James watched from the shelter, his eyes misting with emotion. He had seen many orphaned hippos find comfort in these carefully placed stones, but the moment never lost its power. It was the instant when a traumatized creature, having lost everything familiar, discovered that trust could be rebuilt, even with something as simple as a stone. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, River remained beside her boulder. She had settled into the mud at its base, her body half in water, half on land, pressed firmly against the stone's cool flank. In her rest, River occasionally nuzzled the boulder with her snout, as if checking that her silent guardian was still keeping watch. That was the first night since her rescue that River slept without crying out. The distressed calls that had broken the care team's hearts now replaced by the soft, rhythmic breathing of peaceful sleep. The boulder had become her anchor in a frightening new world. A silent but profound connection had begun. Half a year had passed since River found her stone companion. The Botswana sun blazed overhead, its heat tempered by the constant mist from the habitat's circulation system. River had grown substantially, now nearly 110 centimeters long and weighing approximately 140 kilograms. Her pinkish-gray skin had darkened to a healthy brown-gray, glistening with the protective mucus her body now produced properly. Her eyes shone with intelligence and vitality. But one thing remained constant: River's devotion to her boulder. Every morning began the same way. River would wake in her sleeping pool and immediately paddle to the shallow area where her stone companion waited. This ritual had become so predictable that the care team set their watches by it. River would approach with surprising speed for a hippo, her mouth opening in what looked almost like a smile, the characteristic hippo expression that showed contentment rather than aggression. When she reached the boulder, River would perform an elaborate greeting ceremony. She would circle it once completely, running her face along its entire surface as if checking for changes. Then she would position herself in her favorite spot, right side pressed firmly against the stone's curve, and emit a series of soft grunts and wheeze honks, the sounds hippos use for friendly communication within a pod. Dr. Kumalo, during her detailed observations, noted that River spent an average of 8 to 10 hours each day in direct physical contact with the boulder. She would eat the lettuce, grass, and specialized herbivore pellets placed nearby without moving away from her stone. She would doze with her head resting on a smooth ledge of the boulder. She even defecated exclusively in the water near the boulder, typical hippo behavior for marking territory, but in River's case, perhaps marking her special relationship with this space. These behaviors initially raised concerns among the expert team. Hippo calves at River's age should be highly active, playful, and increasingly interested in social interactions. In a wild pod, young hippos spend their days playfighting, exploring, and learning the complex social rules that govern hippo society. River seemed content to exist in a world of two, herself and her stone. James, now River's primary caretaker and someone she trusted implicitly, decided to conduct a careful test. One morning, before River woke, he arranged for the boulder to be moved, just 5 meters from its usual position, to a different part of the shallow pool. River's reaction was immediate and distressing. When she woke and paddled to the familiar spot, finding it empty, she began making loud distress calls, the whining, almost crying sound hippo calves make when separated from their mothers. These calls, carrying across the water, sounded almost human in their grief. River spun in circles, her head swinging back and forth, nostrils flaring as she desperately searched for the familiar scent. She paddled frantically around the pool, checking every corner, her distress escalating with each passing minute. The sounds she made evolved from questioning calls to genuine panic, bellowing grunts that the entire facility could hear. It took only 4 minutes for River to locate the boulder in its new position, but those 4 minutes clearly felt like an eternity to her. When she found it, River's response was heartbreaking in its intensity. She rushed to the stone and wrapped her entire body around it as much as her hippo physiology allowed. Pressing her face against it, rubbing her whole length along its surface, even attempting to climb partially onto it as if trying to physically prevent it from disappearing again. For the next 30 minutes, River didn't move from the boulder's immediate vicinity. She maintained constant physical contact, touching it repeatedly with her snout and the sensitive whisker-like vibrancy around her mouth. Her breathing gradually slowed from panicked gasps to normal rhythm, but she remained vigilant, as if afraid the stone might vanish again if she stopped watching. This experiment confirmed what James had suspected. River's relationship with the boulder had evolved far beyond simple comfort-seeking. It had become a profound attachment, comparable to the bond a calf forms with its mother. The boulder represented safety, continuity, and love in River's psychological landscape. River's behavioral patterns became increasingly complex and fascinating. She developed elaborate daily routines with her stone companion. Each morning, after her greeting ceremony, River would spend time grooming the boulder, using her mouth to remove any algae, debris, or leaves that had accumulated overnight. This mirrored the social grooming behaviors hippos perform with pod members in the wild. During midday, when the heat was most intense, River would position herself so that her body created shade over part of the boulder where it rose above the waterline. James initially thought this was coincidental, but weeks of observation revealed it was deliberate. River was protecting her friend from the harsh sun, an act of care that demonstrated remarkable emotional intelligence. Most remarkably, River had begun talking to the boulder. Not the distress calls she made to her human caretakers, but an extensive repertoire of soft rumbles, clicks, wheeze honks, and that peculiar hippo sound called wheeze blowing, a rhythmic exhaling through the nostrils that creates a distinctive chattering sound. These vocalizations occurred primarily during early morning and late evening, the times when hippos in the wild typically engage in social communication within their pods. James began recording these sessions extensively, fascinated by their consistency and apparent purpose. The sounds River made were distinctly different from any other vocalizations in her repertoire. They were intimate, varied, and seemed to follow patterns, almost as if she were narrating her day to her silent companion. The most touching behavior emerged during River's rest periods. Instead of simply lying beside the boulder, she had begun using her mouth to explore every centimeter of its surface. Following the quartz veins with her sensitive lips, testing every indentation and protrusion with gentle determination. This behavior could continue for over an hour, with River appearing completely absorbed in the tactile experience, her eyes half closed in concentration. During thunderstorms, dramatic events in Botswana that bring violent rain and lightning, River's protective instincts toward the boulder intensified dramatically. She would position her body between the boulder and the direction of the storm, her substantial bulk serving as a shield. She would remain in this protective stance throughout the entire weather event, despite the water level rising uncomfortably high and debris being swept through the pool. The care team began noticing that River's emotional state correlated directly with her proximity to the boulder. When beside it, she appeared calm, confident, even playful with floating toys. But when circumstances forced separation, medical examinations, habitat cleaning, or dietary assessments, her anxiety levels would spike noticeably. Her respiration rate would increase, her ears would flatten against her head in distress, and she would constantly orient toward the boulder's location. Dr. Kumalo documented these behaviors meticulously in her research journal, recognizing that River's case was providing unprecedented insight into hippo emotional capacity. The depth of attachment she had formed with an inanimate object challenged traditional understanding of hippo psychology and demonstrated the species' remarkable capacity for emotional bonding. As River continued growing, her devotion to the boulder only deepened. What had begun as a traumatized calf seeking comfort had evolved into something more profound, a relationship that fulfilled multiple psychological needs. The boulder served as mother figure, podmate, protector, and constant companion in a world that had initially seemed hostile and unpredictable. Other hippo calves at the facility began taking interest in River's unusual relationship. Some would approach curiously, drawn by River's obvious contentment. But River's body language made her boundaries clear. The boulder was hers alone. She would position herself between other hippos and her stone. Not aggressively. Hippos can be viciously aggressive when truly threatened, but with unmistakable possessive behavior. Her message was clear. This relationship was sacred. James found himself both moved and concerned by this development. While River's bond with the boulder had clearly been instrumental in her emotional recovery from trauma, he worried about the long-term implications. Hippos are intensely social animals. Their survival in the wild depends on understanding complex pod dynamics, establishing social hierarchies, and forming protective relationships with other hippos. River's current trajectory suggested she might never develop these crucial skills. 14 months had passed since River's rescue, and the young hippo had transformed into a robust, healthy juvenile weighing nearly 380 kilograms. Her physical recovery was extraordinary. From the dehydrated, sunburned calf found dying in the mud, she had become a strong, intelligent young hippo with glossy skin, bright eyes, and impressive developing tusks. Yet her attachment to the boulder remained absolute, presenting Dr. Kumalo and her team with one of the most challenging decisions in the facility's history. The Wildlife Conservation Botswana had successfully rehabilitated dozens of hippos over the years, with the ultimate goal always being reintegration into wild pods. Most orphaned hippos gradually formed bonds with other rescued calves, creating surrogate pod structures that could eventually be released together into protected waterways. River's case was proving uniquely complicated. Dr. Kumalo convened a meeting with the senior care team on a humid morning in early December. The conference room overlooked the aquatic habitat where River could be seen in her customary position, body pressed against her boulder, chin resting on its sun-warmed surface, the picture of contentment. The team reviewed River's comprehensive progress reports. Physically, she was thriving. Her weight, diet, and general health were exemplary. Cognitively, she showed high intelligence, problem-solving abilities, and responsiveness to her caretakers. She had even learned to respond to verbal cues and hand signals, something wild hippos never needed but that demonstrated her mental flexibility. Socially, however, the picture was troubling. While River had learned to tolerate other hippos in her vicinity and would even engage in brief investigative interactions, she invariably returned to her boulder within minutes. She showed no interest in the playfighting, mutual grooming, or social bonding that were essential for survival in a wild pod. The boulder had become her entire social universe. James presented his detailed behavioral analysis, his voice thick with emotion as he described the depth of River's attachment. He had documented over 600 hours of River's interactions with the boulder, noting the evolution from simple comfort-seeking to complex, ritualized behaviors that closely resembled the social patterns hippos displayed with pod family members. Dr. Thandayo Makona, the center's animal behavioral psychologist, offered her professional assessment. River's attachment fell into a pattern similar to what human psychologists called maladaptive dependency, an attachment that, while providing short-term psychological comfort, inhibited healthy development and future independence. The boulder had become more than a comfort object. It had become River's substitute for all social connection. The difficult truth crystallized in the room. For River to have any chance of eventual reintegration into hippo society, her dependence on the boulder would need to be systematically reduced and ultimately eliminated. It was a decision that would cause immense short-term distress in service of long-term welfare, the kind of heartbreaking choice that wildlife rehabilitation sometimes demanded. The team developed a carefully graduated intervention plan spanning several months. Rather than abruptly removing the boulder, which would almost certainly traumatize River severely, they would implement a series of progressive changes designed to slowly expand her world beyond her stone companion. Phase 1 began subtly. The boulder was moved incrementally, just 3 meters each day, requiring River to explore slightly more of her habitat to maintain contact with it. Initially, these small changes caused visible distress. River would search anxiously until locating the boulder, then spend extra time in physical contact as if reassuring herself of its permanence. Simultaneously, the team introduced enrichment activities designed to engage River's natural intelligence and curiosity. Food puzzles submerged in different pool areas, floating toys, and sensory exploration opportunities were placed at increasing distances from the boulder. The goal was to create positive experiences that might gradually compete with her fixation. James took primary responsibility for this delicate process, spending additional hours each day with River. He would position himself near the boulder during River's conversation sessions, gradually inserting himself into what had been a private ritual. Initially, River seemed confused and slightly annoyed by this intrusion, but her trust in James eventually allowed his presence during these intimate moments. The breakthrough came during the 4th week of intervention. James had been sitting quietly in the shallow water beside River as she performed her usual morning ritual with the boulder. Then he began making sounds. Not words, but gentle rumbles and wheeze honks that mimicked some of River's own vocalizations. River paused mid-rub, turning her head to stare at James with what appeared to be profound surprise. For several moments, she simply looked at him, processing this unexpected development. Then, cautiously, she made a soft inquiry sound, the questioning grunt hippos use when uncertain. James responded with another gentle vocalization. River's ears perked forward. Then, for the first time in many months, River directed some of her communicative behavior toward a living being rather than the boulder. She moved slightly toward James and touched his arm with her snout, a hippo gesture of investigation and tentative trust. The interaction lasted only a few minutes before River returned to her boulder, but it represented a crucial crack in the psychological wall she had built around herself and her stone companion. Building on this success, the team introduced Tamani, a female hippo calf slightly younger than River who had arrived 4 months earlier. Tamani had successfully bonded with other calves and displayed the confident, social behavior the team hoped River might eventually develop. The first meetings between River and Tamani were orchestrated near the boulder, ensuring River felt secure during these introductions. Tamani approached with the typical curiosity of young hippos, showing particular interest in River's obvious attachment to the stone. She waddled close to the boulder and even rubbed against it experimentally, as if trying to understand what made it special. River's reaction was unexpected. Rather than displaying territorial aggression, which hippos are certainly capable of, she seemed almost proud. She positioned herself beside Tamani, as if presenting her special friend, occasionally touching both the boulder and Tamani with her snout in what appeared to be an introductory gesture. Over several weeks, a tentative friendship developed. Tamani would join River during some of her boulder sessions, and gradually, River began showing interest in Tamani's activities, even when they occurred away from the stone companion. The first time River voluntarily left the boulder to follow Tamani to the feeding area, James had to step away to compose himself, overwhelmed with relief and hope. The intervention process required unprecedented patience and observation. Dr. Kumalo established a detailed monitoring protocol, with team members documenting River's every interaction, mood shift, and behavioral change. They noted that environmental factors affected her attachment intensity. During storms or unusually hot days, River clung more desperately to her boulder, while mild, pleasant weather saw her venture slightly further from her anchor. During the 3rd month of intervention, the team introduced environmental enrichment specifically designed to trigger River's natural foraging instincts. They created elaborate food trails where vegetables and browse were hidden at progressively greater distances from the boulder, requiring exploration to find them. Initially, River would grab food quickly and rush back to her stone, but gradually she began lingering at discovery sites, her natural curiosity overcoming anxiety. The most significant breakthrough came when Jabari, a young male hippo recently rescued from a drought-stricken area, showed interest in the boulder. Unlike previous introductions, Jabari approached the stone with reverence similar to River's, perhaps recognizing in her behavior something of his own need for security. River's reaction to Jabari was completely unexpected. Instead of territorial possessiveness, River seemed to recognize a kindred spirit. For the first time since her attachment began, River actually invited another hippo to share her sacred space. She used gentle nudges and positioning to guide Jabari closer to the boulder, then arranged herself so both could lean against it simultaneously, one on each side. This moment marked a turning point. Dr. Makona theorized that River was beginning to understand that her need for comfort and security could be shared with others. potentially transferred to living companions who could reciprocate her affection in ways a stone could not. Phase 3 was implemented with cautious optimism. The boulder was gradually moved to different locations within the habitat, but now with a crucial modification. Other hippos were always present during these relocations. This created situations where River had to interact with her peers while managing her anxiety about the boulder's changing position. During one particularly significant session, the boulder was moved to the far end of the pool while River was napping on the sunny bank. When she woke and discovered the change, instead of panicking as she had in earlier months, River looked around and noticed Tumaini and Jabari playing in the mud wallow nearby. For several long moments, she remained completely still, clearly experiencing an internal conflict. Her gaze moved between the boulder's new location and her hippo companions. Her ears swiveled back and forth, a sign James had learned indicated internal debate in River. Then Tumaini made a loud, playful honk grunt, the hippo sound for inviting play, and something shifted in River's posture. She took several steps toward the other hippos, paused to look back at her boulder one more time, then continued forward. Before joining them, River made a sound James had never heard before. A complex, multi-toned rumble that seemed to carry layers of meaning. It was as if she was telling the boulder she would return, but that she needed to explore this possibility of connection with her own kind. The play session lasted nearly 90 minutes, the longest period River had ever voluntarily spent away from the boulder. When she finally returned to it, her behavior was markedly different. Instead of desperate clinging, River's contact was gentle, almost reverent, more like a beloved friend greeting than a dependent's desperate clutching. Phase 4 proved the most emotionally challenging for both River and her caretakers. The boulder was moved to an observation area, still visible through the habitat's clear panel barrier, but no longer accessible. The team had braced for this to be traumatic, and River's initial response confirmed their fears. For the first 5 days, River spent most of her waking hours at the barrier, her face pressed against the clear panel, trunk reaching fruitlessly toward her stone companion. Her distress vocalizations echoed across the facility, heartbreaking wheeze honks and honk rumbles that kept the entire staff emotionally shaken. She refused most food and exhibited signs of the depression that had characterized her earliest days at the center. James maintained constant presence during this period, even sleeping in the habitat office to be available throughout the night. He noticed that while River was clearly distressed, she wasn't regressing to the complete withdrawal they had feared. She accepted his touch, responded to his voice, and even engaged in brief interactions with the other hippos, though her attention remained primarily fixed on the distant boulder. On the 6th day, something extraordinary happened. Tumaini approached River at the barrier and began mimicking her behavior, pressing her face against the panel and making soft vocalizations toward the boulder. It was as if Tumaini understood River's pain and was offering her own form of solidarity. Other hippos joined them, creating an unprecedented display of what could only be called empathy. They didn't try to distract River or pull her away. They simply joined her in her vigil, offering their presence as comfort. This collective support seemed to provide River with the emotional strength to begin processing her separation from the boulder. While she continued daily visits to the barrier, these became progressively shorter and less desperate. She began accepting comfort from her hippo companions, allowing them to touch and reassure her during moments of distress. The 6th month of intervention brought the most crucial test. The boulder was moved completely out of sight, to a storage area where River could neither see nor detect it. The team prepared for severe regression, but River's response surprised everyone. She went to the barrier and stood there for exactly 9 minutes, making her familiar calling sounds, softer now, almost resigned. Then, as if reaching some internal resolution, she turned deliberately and walked directly to where Tumaini and Jabari were engaging in play fighting in the deep pool. Without hesitation, she joined their activity, throwing her considerable weight into the game with an enthusiasm none of the caretakers had ever witnessed. She opened her mouth wide in the hippo expression of play aggression, grappled with Jabari in the water, and even initiated a game of chase with Tumaini. Dr. Kimalo documented this moment as the definitive turning point in River's rehabilitation. The young hippo had made a conscious choice to invest her emotional energy in living relationships rather than her attachment to the inanimate object. It demonstrated remarkable psychological growth and resilience. The following weeks saw River's social integration accelerate dramatically. Her natural intelligence and emotional sensitivity, once focused entirely on the boulder, now expanded to encompass her growing hippo family. She became particularly attentive to the needs of newer arrivals, seeming to understand their confusion and fear from her own experience. She would position herself near frightened calves, offering her presence as comfort, sometimes even guiding them to quiet corners of the habitat where they could feel safe. Jabari, who had shared River's appreciation for the boulder, became her closest companion. Their friendship developed into the deep, complex bond essential for survival in the wild. They slept together in the mud, foraged together, played together, and even developed their own communication patterns. Specific vocalizations and touch gestures that other hippos seemed to respect and understand. The pivotal moment came on a bright morning during River's second year at the sanctuary. The care team had arranged something special. The boulder was returned to the main habitat, placed in River's old favorite spot at the pool's edge. They watched with collective breath held as River discovered its presence, uncertain whether this reunion would trigger regression in her progress. River approached the boulder slowly, her behavior observed by every team member present. She extended her snout and touched the familiar granite surface, making the soft conversational sounds she had once reserved for their private moments. For several minutes, she stood in quiet communion with her old companion, and James found his eyes welling with tears. Then Timani approached, followed by Jabari, and soon several other hippos. Instead of becoming possessive, River seemed to be introducing them to her stone friend, using gentle nudges and positioning to guide them closer. The hippos explored the boulder with curiosity and respect, as if understanding its significance in River's journey. After approximately 25 minutes of this group interaction, River made a sound that brought tears to every observer's eyes. It was the same complex, multi-layered rumble she had made months earlier, but now it carried different meaning. Not goodbye, but rather a transformation of their relationship, from desperate dependency to grateful memory. River stepped back from the boulder, touched Timani gently with her snout, and walked with her toward the deep pool where the other hippos were gathering. She looked back only once, and in that glance, James saw not longing, but gratitude and closure. The integration process continued over the following months. River learned her place in the young pod's social hierarchy, developed complex relationships, and displayed the emotional intelligence that would prove crucial for wild survival. The boulder remained in the habitat, but River's visits became brief, respectful acknowledgments rather than desperate necessities. 26 months after her rescue, River stood at the edge of the Chobe River in northern Botswana, part of a group of 6 young hippos being reintegrated into the wild. She was strong, confident, and fully socialized, a successful rehabilitation by any measure. Her skin glowed with health, her body was powerful and well-proportioned, and most importantly, she had formed the deep social bonds necessary for pod life. As the care team prepared to leave after the release, River did something that encapsulated her entire journey. She walked to the riverbank, selected a smooth stone, not large, about the size of a melon, and carried it briefly in her mouth. She set it down at the water's edge, looked at it for a long moment, then turned and walked into the river to join her new family, who were already calling for her. The symbolic weight of this gesture was not lost on anyone present. River was carrying forward the lessons of love and attachment, but no longer allowing them to constrain her future. Dr. Kumalo watched through tears as River submerged into the dark water of the Chobe, surrounded by her adopted family. In her final report, she wrote that River's case had fundamentally changed her understanding of hippo emotional capacity and the complex interplay between attachment and growth. The stone had taught her how to love, and now River was ready to love the living world around her.